Our next speaker, we're going to change direction a little bit and bring up Dr. Kristin Comella. And honestly, this 75-year-old lady who looks like she's 30 years old, barely, is a testament to her pioneering with stem cells. I think she's been using them since she was about 12 years old and became a stem cell scientist. She truly is the pioneer for this adipose area. I don't think anybody started really working with adipose before Kristin got involved with it and started introducing it years ago and really helped popularize it. She, along with us, have actually been the target of the FDA. We've taken our lumps, but I've told this young lady she's going to be Queen of the Hill in a few months, I hope, or soon enough, and we're all going to be back in action. So welcome, Kristin. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. So I just wanted to kind of give you a summary of my journey in the space, but also a little bit of a background on the FDA's role in cellular medicine and cellular therapy. And the title of the talk today is My Cells, My Choice. And I'm wearing my Cells, My Choice t-shirt, which is nowadays the only t-shirt I ever wear. I just go everywhere wearing this shirt to make a point that the cells inside my body are owned by me and only me. And the fact that anyone would try to argue different is kind of crazy. So I have zero disclosures, and I want to make it very clear that everything I'm talking about in the talk today is my story, my journey. I'm not representing any company at this point, so I'm not affiliated with US Stem Cell at this point. So a history of the FDA and stem cells. So many of you may not realize that in 1995, the first cellular product was brought forward. And a company called Genzyme brought forward a product called Carticel. And at this point, there were zero regulations with regards to human cell and tissue products and the use of stem cells in the clinic. So Genzyme brought forward what were culture-expanded chondrocytes, and these were autologous from the same patient, culture-expanded chondrocytes, which would then be injected into the knee joint. And because there were no laws surrounding cellular medicine and its use in the clinic, they self-approved. They said, oh, this is our product, we've tested it, it's great, and now we're selling it. And then they lobbied the FDA to put in place really strict regulations with regards to cellular therapy products, including autologous products, your own cells. And they said, but we get grandfathered in. So they got to be the first and only FDA-approved cellular product, and then they lobbied for the use of laws to make it much more challenging for anyone else to bring forward any sort of cellular therapy. So at this point, the FDA said, yeah, great idea, we should regulate this. And they put forward what were called guidance documents. Now remember, guidance documents are only the opinion of a regulatory agency. They are not legally enforceable. They are not laws. In order for something to be considered a law, it has to be enacted by Congress, and it has to be part of what is called the Code of Federal Regulations. And there are very strict procedures with regards to bringing laws forward. And this prevents our regulatory agencies from becoming too powerful and having too many laws in place. There has to be checks and balances. So Congress has to agree that it's a good idea and bring that forward. So at this point, they brought forward a guidance document that said that the agency would not assert any regulatory control over cells or tissues that are removed from a patient and transplanted back into that same patient during a single surgical procedure. So in other words, they would not be regulating surgical practices, medical practices, physicians, and that there would be no FDA oversight on tissue harvested and transplanted right back in. So in line with this guidance document, they went through the appropriate rulemaking process and brought forward in the Code of Federal Regulations what are called the 1271s. And these are the regulations that oversee all human cell and tissue products, HCTPs. And at this point, they included in the 1271 an exemption that states an establishment that removes HCTPs from an individual and implants such HCTPs into that same individual during the same surgical procedure is the practice of medicine, and it will not be regulated by the FDA. It's pretty clear, right? It's not ambiguous. It's pretty obvious what was intended. Tissue out, tissue in, practice of medicine, done bedside. So 2001. So kind of along this history timeline, just to kind of put things in perspective, US Stem Cell, which I was previously associated with, brought forward a product for treating heart disease. And so in this case, we were culture expanding muscle-derived stem cells, injecting them directly into the heart. So we treated our first patient in 2001. And this was right at the time that Genzyme had kind of lobbied to make sure that this went through what is called an investigational new drug, an IND. So we went through the appropriate process, and as a matter of fact, this was one of the first ever approved INDs for stem cell therapy, and it was the first cardiac patient treated with stem cells directly into the heart using a needle injection via catheter. In 2006, we began working with fat cells. At the time, Dr. Stu Williams, many of you know him, was on our scientific advisory board, and he said, hey, you better look at these fat cells. And by the way, the first people to work with stromal vascular fraction were Rod Bell and Jones in a laboratory, and they were studying protein pathways. They had no idea that it would later be referred to as liquid gold, and that there would be so many applications of these cells. So Stu Williams was a graduate student in that laboratory and discovered a lot of properties. In particular, the cells could be angiogenic in nature. And when he was on our advisory board, he recommended that you take a look, we take a look at these cells. So I started messing with them in the lab, and it was mind-blowing. I had done a lot of work with bone marrow cells. I had done a lot of work with muscle-derived cells, and working with stem cells from fat in the lab was a whole new ballgame. They grew better. They differentiated better. They were just easier to work with. The patterns that they would create in the dishes were unique, and I mean, I'm like a lab nerd, so I would look under the scope and be like, oh, this is awesome. And so we had no idea all of the things that would come after that. And we first began utilizing the cells in lung disease. Of course, cardiac, because we were already doing cardiac, but lung disease. And we did a lot of work outside the country, and then eventually realized that according to the regulations, as long as we did tissue out, tissue in, because this was being done with bone marrow all the time, tissue out, tissue in, so why would it be any different from fat? The main difference would be that we would get a lot more potent cells off of that fat draw than we would off of the bone marrow draw, and in particular, this would be beneficial in systemic issues. So we could deliver the cells IV, and we'll do this bedside, and this is great because we already have this other product that we're putting through the FDA in an IND, but this will allow us to start treating patients right away, bedside, and we began working with many practitioners throughout the world, and the results were kind of unbelievable. Around this same time, Chris Centeno was doing point-of-care treatments, so bone marrow out, bone marrow in, but he also began utilizing culture-expanded bone marrow cells and was culture-expanding those cells in his office. He was not a registered tissue bank. He did not have a GMP lab. And so in the Code of Federal Regulations, there was a law that required that if you were doing any sort of culture expansion in that way, you must have the appropriate laboratory protocols in place. You must have a registered tissue bank. There's certain regulations that you must follow, and that was in the Code of Federal Regulations. So the FDA placed a lawsuit on Chris Centeno and his organizations stating that this is not the practice of medicine because you're doing this in office, and they sought after an injunction on Regenex. So that trial began going on. He did go through an appeal process, and I'm just going to put a little footnote here that the reason that he lost is because the agency was awarded summary judgment. And we'll talk a little bit more about this concept of summary judgment. And they also were awarded what's called our deference. So our deference, remember that. It's really important. So in 2014, the FDA said, hey, wait a minute, there's all these people doing these fat-derived type procedures, and now they're addressing systemic issues, autoimmune, neurological. There's a lot of stuff going on, and guess what else is happening? We're getting results. People are getting better. And what happens when people get better? They don't necessarily need some of the medications that they were previously taking, and so what does that mean? profits might be affected by people who very much like to protect their profits. So the FDA said, well, we better put a stop to this stromal vascular fraction. And so they put out draft guidance documents. And again, guidance documents, not laws, opinions of regulatory agencies. And what they said is that, hey, when we created that law in 2001, we forgot to tell you fat was excluded from that. That's not part of it. That is a drug. Bone marrow, practice of medicine. Fat, drug. The cells in your fat, a drug. And so the problem is you cannot use a guidance document to change a law. You must go through the appropriate law-making procedures. This is how the country has been set up. There are processes, there are checks and balances. So they put a lot of other crazy things in the guidance documents, including things about fat transfer that would make fat transfer not allowed, something that's been going on for 100 years. So surgeons would no longer be able to move fat from one location to another. People lost their minds on that one. Oh, they even said at one point about women's breasts, the only purpose of a women's breast is for lactation. What? Like, why weren't women groups up in arms over this one? I mean, this should have been big news, the fact that the regulatory agencies are trying to step on our rights as humans and certainly as Americans. So they did this, and around the same time in 2015, we began getting inspections from the FDA. Anyone gone through an FDA inspection? Yeah, just them. So this is interesting. They come in, and I think they assume that you're not going to know your rights. So like one of the first things they said when they came in was, we need a list of all your patients, their names and everything else. And I said, no, HIPAA. Like, I'm not giving you a list of my patients. I will show you patient files and redact names. That's how this is going to work. And the inspector said to me, no, we're from the government and we're exempt from HIPAA. So that's interesting. Show me the law that says that. And so she showed me a law that said, if the practitioner deems there to be a public safety issue, they can reveal the name. And I said, guess what's not happening here? A public safety issue. And she said to me, well, we do deem it to be a public safety issue. And I said, well, we can take that one up in court. No names. So of course I redacted the names, but they have the ability to come in and do anything they want, look at all your files. They requested to be in the room during a surgical procedure, and I said, no, that's HIPAA violation, it's not safe. I've got a physician in there, I've got a patient in there. No, you are not going into a surgical room. The patient didn't consent to that. So then they wrote this whole big thing up, how I'm refusing inspections. Of course, that made the news. They did a public hearing. And this had to do with the guidance documents that were brought forward. And they said, okay, we'll allow anyone who wants to come forward to speak and make comments on these documents to come and speak. And so dozens of practitioners, scientists, patients came forward and said, don't do this. These are our own cells. It's making us better. Doctors, Elliot was there. Elliot's talk was so beautiful. He got on the stage and said, hey, we're physicians. We could do we could go back to our regular practices, which we're, by the way, doing okay. Why would we risk everything to do this? And it's because it works. And it's because our patients are getting better. And because we took an oath to help patients. That's why we're here. Literally, the FDA agents who sat on the stage, one of them fell asleep. They didn't listen to a word we had to say. And then they did a closed-door meeting where they invited their buddies from the university to talk about what bad actors we all were. It's kind of a rigged game, you guys. We're playing a rigged game, but I'm not going to stop playing. So in 2017, the FDA finalized their guidance documents, and they said, fat is a drug. You know, they said a bunch of things, but the problem is not a law, a guidance document. So just to give you an idea, lots of publications that our group has done with regards to the use of stromal vascular fraction. So you guys can check these out. They're all indexed on PubMed, peer-reviewed, et cetera, et cetera. I love it when people say, well, there's no peer-reviewed. Yes, there is. There's so many journal articles out there. These are only the ones that we've written. So plenty of stuff out there. So one of the things when they come and do an inspection, if they find that you're not following what they deem to be the rules and their own interpretation of it, they will give you what's called a Form 483. And it's kind of the form is called 483, and it just details out why they think that you're not compliant with whatever they deem. You have the opportunity to respond back to the Form 483. So I would often, respond back. And by the way, when they would do like the questioning, they do these interrogatories, they would say things like, now, when you're manufacturing a drug at your facility, and I would stop them every time. I'm just going to stop you every time you say that. I'm not manufacturing a drug here. But they keep doing it throughout the whole thing. They also try to get you to sign a document that says, my name is Kristin Comella, and I'm manufacturing drugs that are not approved. I'm not signing that. You're out of your mind. So on August 28th, they did a press release, they being the FDA. The DOJ also did one. So by the way, the DOJ are the attorneys for the FDA, Department of Justice. And they did a press release, but they didn't tell us they were going to do a press release. We learned about it from the media, and they also issued this public warning letter. So it was a big to-do. And my phone starts getting flooded. New York Times, LA Times, Washington Post, BuzzFeed, Wired. They also started calling my children's mobile phones because those phones were listed under my name. So my kids were getting calls like at school. My son's texting me, Mom, I just got a call from the New York Times. I'm like, oof, don't answer your phone for a while. And so the same day also, I contacted Dr. Berman in the morning. I'm like, have you realized what's going on? He's like, no, I don't know anything. I'm in surgery. I'm like, oh God, ignorance is bliss. So the FDA investigators said that they documented significant deviations from current good manufacturing practices in the manufacture of at least 256 lots of stem cell products by the clinic. So these 256 files that they reviewed were patients. So we were not manufacturing anything. A patient came in, they got a mini liposuction by a practitioner, they had those cells immediately delivered right back to them bedside, and then they walked out. There was no manufacturing of drugs. If you went into any surgery center, hospital, clinic, you name it, and inspected them against good manufacturing practices, 100% they would fail every single time. No clinic is compliant with drug manufacturing. Drug manufacturing requires clean rooms. Drug manufacturings will have large bioreactor vats with very strict cleaning protocols, with sterility testing, with all sorts of things. These are not the kind of things that are practical in a surgical suite or make sense in a surgical type procedure. You would not be able to be compliant. You couldn't maintain a closed system. You're opening a body. That is not closed. So there would be no way to classify the isolation of stromal vascular fraction as a manufactured drug. Everything is completed bedside. You're not changing the cells in any way. You're merely separating tissue, which was the exact intent of the law that was created in 2001. You cannot come back after the fact and change your mind about it. So I started kind of looking at this, and there was this one individual that kept making quotes and comments about us, and it was this Dr. Peter Marks, who is the head and current head of the Center for Biologics at the FDA. He's the head of CBER. And 2 days after the press release about us being bad actors, the FDA put out a press release granting Novartis priority review, breakthrough therapy designation, and granted approval to this awesome new autologous cell therapy called Chimera that sells for $1.2 million per dose. 2 days after the press release on us. And lo and behold, Peter Marks talking about how awesome Novartis is. They're so good, and talking about what bad actors the rest of us are. And the media saying, and they sell it for $5,000 per dose. Yeah, a little different than the $1.2 million per dose that Novartis, the saint, the savior, the first of its kind treatment that Peter Marks talks about. So I was like, who is this Peter Marks guy? Why do I barely know anything about him? So I'm thinking, I better look at this, right? So I go to his CV that's on the FDA website. He's great. He's worked at all these universities, Brigham, you name it. But there was one sentence in there that caught my eye. He worked for several years in the pharmaceutical industry on the clinical development of hematology and oncology products. Interesting. So if you're going to be in charge of approving Novartis's products, and especially the ones that are going to sell for $1.2 million and $2.1 million per dose, what's the one thing that would force you to kind of recuse yourself from being a part of that? Working at Novartis? Yeah, 20 pages deep on Peter Marks in Google, you can find that, oh, interesting, he was the senior clinical research physician at Novartis. He was promoted. He was the senior director of clinical development at Novartis. He was promoted again. He was the senior director of the oncology business unit at Novartis. What could possibly go wrong if you're in charge of approving the most expensive cellular therapy products of Novartis, your former employee, which, by the way, all directors get stock? And if you have nothing to hide, then why not disclose that in your CV? The rest of us had to disclose. You all had to put disclosures. Why doesn't he? Maybe there's nothing. Maybe he sold off all his stocks. I don't know. But why are you hiding it? Why is it no longer? Why is it scrubbed from your CV? What could go wrong, right? This could go wrong. Fraudulent data used by Novartis to gain approval for their cell and gene therapy products. But the agency said, we're gonna look at this, but this should remain on the market. They're gonna keep selling their $2.1 million per dose cell therapy product while we look into it. And guess who's heading the investigation? Peter Marks. I mean, you guys, I just want to give you an idea of the rigged game that we're playing. And I could spend hours looking at every single executive at the FDA and show you all the incestuous relationships and how they go after medicine that doesn't fit in to their paradigm. Drugs. And if you can't bottle it and sell it, and the pharmaceutical companies can't make money off it, they're not interested. Because think about it. If they could make money off of stromal vascular fraction, don't you think a drug company would have gone through the clinical trials necessary at this point? It probably costs like $200 million, right? $200 million for Novartis? That's nothing. They would have brought stromal vascular fraction forward. And you know why they don't? Because there's no money in it for them. They can't patent it, they can't bottle it, they can't mass manufacture it. There's also no money in something that gets people better. They need you to be on their pills for decades. It's good profits. So, about a month ago, when nobody was paying attention, guess what the FDA announced? We're going to let Novartis off the hook for all that fraudulent data in their cell therapy product that they brought forward. No fines, no lawsuits, no injunctions, no inspections. They're really sorry, and they meant it. Nobody noticed. Was this on the front page of any newspaper? Sure wasn't. I had to dig deep to find this article. So, on Sunday, March 25th, 2018, and this was about 6 or more months after we received that surprise press release that talked about us being bad actors. By the way, no press release on any of the Novartis stuff about the fraudulent data. Only press releases about us. The lawyers called me and they said, okay, so we received what is a draft lawsuit. It was Palm Sunday, I remember. And when I opened the document, it said, the United States of America versus, and then I noticed my name, Kristin Comella. I didn't even know this was a possibility. I was like, the United States of America is suing me? Like, what states? Like all 50? Puerto Rico? I never heard of such a thing. And so the lawyers start explaining to me, this is a civil case, they're bringing a lawsuit against you, and what they're seeking is an injunction. They want you to stop doing stromal vascular fraction because the stem cells inside your fat are a drug. Now, at the same time, this was before it was filed in the federal courts, and by the way, the attorneys are the Department of Justice, the DOJ. They said, we can make this all go away. All you have to do is sign this consent decree that says you're a bad girl and you're really sorry and you won't do it anymore. I'm paraphrasing. And so I'm in the backyard because it's a Sunday, I'm home, and I'm sitting in the grass and the lawyer's kind of talking to me, and I kind of hang up and I've got tears. I'm just sitting there and my husband comes out and he sees me and he says, what's going on? I told him what was happening and I looked up and I said, you know what I have to do? And he said, I know what you have to do. So I told the FDA to go, you know what, and I'll see you in court. Not signing your stupid document, consent decree. Never even heard of such a thing, but I'm not signing it. It's ridiculous. So about a month later, the lawsuit is filed. I knew that it would be hard, right? Like I knew that. Like, okay, you're fighting the United States of America. Like that's kind of that feels like a big, like I'm in a club, right? That's like a elite club, people who get sued by the United States of America. I didn't know all the things that would then happen next. So they seek permanent injunction against me, the media. I mean, fake news like you wouldn't believe. Senators start coming after me. Like, who's this guy? I don't even know. Iowa? Why does he even know about anything in Florida? The LA Times, the New York Times. Sometimes Mark is in the pictures. So it's fun. Yes. By the way, I mean, you guys have no idea the times that I was like, okay, I'm out. I can't do it anymore. And I call Mark, and he's just like a savior for me. Like, I don't know if I could have done it without Elliot and Mark. It's been, yes. Front page of the local paper. So like at first I'm freaking out, and I'm going to restaurants and like seeing neighbors and stuff, and I'm like, oh shit, they know. But then I realized nobody reads the newspaper anymore. The only person reading these articles is like me and my husband, and I can't even get through them. They're so boring. I'm like, this is boring. Nobody's reading this. Fake news like you wouldn't believe. This one's my favorite. Kristin Comella put on a white doctor's coat, and just for kicks, I'm wearing that same exact jacket that the Wired reporter was referring to, which I purchased at Macy's. Not a white doctor's coat. There was a criminal investigation which started. So these two people began going to the houses of previous patients, investigating. They sent undercover agents. I was attacked by media leaving yoga. I was like, oh, come on. Can't I just do yoga in peace? Calling my children. I guess I wouldn't be surprised if my phone was tapped. I don't even know. Is that a thing? They brought the SEC after me. I was an officer of a publicly traded company. So my husband got served with this subpoena from the SEC that they were doing a full investigation. They subpoenaed my college transcripts. They subpoenaed all of my previous jobs. They subpoenaed all bank accounts as well as my husband's bank accounts of any records, of any trading of stock whatsoever, of my entire database on my computer, all of my emails. More of my emails got read than Hillary Clinton's. I mean, just insane, Insane, right? Like, and you know what they came up with? Oh, this one was fun. From an agency I never heard of, Department of Business and Professional Regulation for the state of Florida, signed by the governor, that I am involved in contraband. I had to look up, I'm like, contraband? I'm not selling guns. I didn't even know what that was. And that this is a criminal act of felony offense. Did you know that people can walk into your practice with stem cells, drugs inside them? Crazy. After all this, you know what they found? Nothing. Exactly nothing. Because I did nothing wrong. I wasn't selling contraband. You know what they found in my emails? That I'm underpaid and overworked. Ridiculous. They couldn't believe that I never sold one share. Not one. And neither did anyone else I know. Because I believed in it. And I still do, because it works. So, our trial date is set for June 12th. We're preparing for trial. Our judge is Ursula Ungaro. That may or may not be what she looks like. I'm not sure. Come on, you can't have the name Ursula and me not do something about it. It's too good. So the DOJ files for what's called summary judgment. And what it says is, a summary judgment is basically, there's no need for us to go to trial. We're right, and here's why. Side the case with us. So when they file summary judgment, we have to respond to that summary judgment and say, no, they're wrong. We're right. Here's why. And it essentially comes down to the fact of cells from your fat are a drug versus the practice of medicine. So I want to bring your attention back to that law that was not ambiguous in any way, shape, or form. Tissue removed in the same surgical procedure and reimplanted is the practice of medicine, period. It's not ambiguous. So just for fun, I wanted to share some excerpts from the FDA's expert witness, Dr. Young, which, by the way, she has very similar background to me, bachelor's and master's in chemical engineering, stem cell biology, PhD from outside the country. And this was 6 hours of a deposition where it was very similar to this, which I'm sharing. Question, Dr. Young, what are stem cells? Answer, there is no regulatory definition of stem cells that I can point to. Question, do you have a medical definition of stem cells? Answer, when you say medical, can you clarify by what you mean, medical? Question, sure, stem cells exist in the body, right? Answer, generally. Question, do stem cells repair human tissue? Answer, I can't, speaking for myself, I can't come to that conclusion. I'd have to see the open scientific literature and the data accumulated to meet that conclusion. Question, is adipose tissue an endocrine organ? Answer, I don't consider adipose tissue an organ. This is their expert, you guys. And I'm thinking, oh, we got this. It's too easy. I almost felt bad for him at that point. I'm like, okay, it's so easy. Their expert doesn't know anything. And she at one point talked about the NIH, and we look to the NIH because they're the smartest, brightest people ever known to walk the planet, and everything they say is like crazy, it's true, and it's awesome. Just for fun, on the NIH. Guess what? Adipose tissue is an endocrine organ. Thank you, NIH. So, what happens? About a week before our trial, the judge grants summary judgment. No trial, won't be necessary. We don't need to hear your witnesses. We don't need to hear you defending your case. Judge says, the government's right. Summary judgment. They were granted the summary judgment. Your cells inside your body are a drug. And what she said is something called our deference. Remember I mentioned it before? The same thing that caused Centeno to lose his case with the government? Our deference. And what it says is that when a regulation is ambiguous, we defer to the agency's interpretation of that regulation. The agency must always be right. They get to make the laws, interpret them, and then decide how to use them. What could possibly go wrong? Our deference. So, 1 week after we lost the case, a case of our deference went before the Supreme Court. And Gorsuch said this: "This rule creates a systematic judicial bias in favor of the federal government, the most powerful of parties, and against everyone else. Without ours shadow hanging over them, parties would receive a fair hearing before an impartial judge. The agency's interpretation would sometimes be rejected. With our, there is no fair hearing and no need for agency to amend the regulation through notice and comment. Under our, judges are forced to subordinate their own views about what the law means to those of a political actor, one who may even be a party to the litigation before the court, aka the FDA, who clearly is not without bias, aka Peter Marks." So the other thing that happened is that she ordered the destruction of any cells that were in a non-related party that was not part of the investigation at all, a registered FDA tissue bank. She said that we must kill all of the cells, and at this point we've got thousands of patients stored of their cells. And patients lost their mind. They started sending letters to the courts. "My stem cells are not a drug. Adult stem cells are not owned by the government. These are mine." And I said, "I will not destroy those cells." And the judge said, "You will, or you will be held in contempt of this court and we will put you in jail. In addition, if you don't get these patients to stop sending us letters, we will also hold you in contempt of court." I guess I'm so powerful that I can actually control who sends letters to people. I didn't get put in jail. I also did not destroy the cells. We were successful in getting a stay on the destruction because we filed an appeal. So right now, we are in appeals court. We are waiting. We're kind of at their mercy. We filed the first appeal brief in October of 2019. The government then responds to that. And then we get to file the final response. A couple days before we're to file, this happens. Judge Jesus Bernal, in the case in California, denies summary judgment and says that the interpretation of same surgical procedure exemption is not entitled to our deference. Ursula Ungaro was wrong in the Florida case. The FDA interpretation is unreasonable and creates enforcement inconsistency. How could you say that bone marrow is not a drug but fat is? It doesn't make sense. So we got to use a lot of the material from that. And of course, we're waiting for this one to go forward in trial, which is set for July. And hopefully we'll hear something from the appeals court soon. We've treated over 12,000 cases. Combined with the people in this room, tens of thousands of cases treated. Are there never adverse events? Of course there are adverse events. All medicine comes with adverse events. There's no such thing as something that doesn't have risk. Breathing has risk. We have dozens of peer-reviewed published articles and thousands of others from around the world. It would be a mistake to deny Americans the simple surgical procedure. The technology to heal exists inside you. Sometimes the prevailing power is wrong. This is from someone famous in our past. And what the court said is that we order that the book be prohibited, and we condemn thee to the prison during our will and pleasure. At this point, the gentleman agreed not to teach the heresy anymore and spent the rest of his life under house arrest, and it took more than 300 years for the church to admit that he was right and to clear his name. Anybody know who it is? Galileo. So it's rumored that when he was in the court and they said, "You will not say that the earth moves around the sun anymore. You will not say that. You will burn all these books." And he said, "Okay, I'll I'll do that. And it's rumored that as he walked out of the courtroom, he said, "And yet it moves." Thank you guys so much. The power to heal comes from within. Check out mycellsmychoice.org. Thank you. Thank you.